Hello, guys. Nice to be with you. It's been quite a while after a very intense summer for both me and Adrian, but finally we are back with a new episode of Friendly Ruby Show. And it's the middle of September. Very soon there are going to be a heck lot of Ruby on Rails conferences, and we're going to Ruko, we're going to Friendly RB in Romania, we're going to Rails World, and we are so excited for all of this. So, yeah, we have a special guest today, André Arko, and Adrian, maybe you continue.
Yeah, nice to see you, man. It's been a long time, but vacation season. We have like a super wonderful guest tonight. It's Andre Arko from RubyCentral.
Yeah.
You probably seen him, in at RubyConf, RailsConf. He's been speaking, but I know him from the RubyGems repo. So we have spoken a few times. We had a few issues there, but not between us. We've some GitHub issues, but yeah, it's very nice to see in person. Hey man, welcome.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thank you very much. Lovely to finally meet up or chat with both of you live, for sure.
Nice. Um, so, so I want to talk about a few things about Ruby Gems, about Ruby Central. How are you guys doing things there? Who decides what to build and how you keep this whole thing going? But I think one of the first things that I would like to know, because I don't know that detail, and probably some of our listeners don't, is can you tell us a little bit about the history, like who created Ruby Gems, who created Bundler? Is has it have them been both made by the same person, same team?
Yeah,
How's that
absolutely.
organized there?
Totally. And this is definitely one of those things where like if you haven't been paying attention for the last 20 years, like of course you don't know the answers to these questions because stuff happens and then you
Yeah.
turn around and it's different and then yeah, absolutely. So this story starts at RubyConf probably in 2002 or 2000, maybe 2004, somewhere around there.
Wow.
Um, and it was kind of like very definitely the early days of Ruby, the language in America for sure, right? Like this was maybe just like the second or third RubyConf ever. Um, and Chad Fowler and Rich Kilmer and David Black and maybe Jim Wyrick were all kind of like at this conference, and they were talking about how it should be easier to uh, you know share libraries with each other, and like at the time, the way that Ruby libraries worked is it was kind of like directly inspired by Python's setup. It was like the same family of things, I should say. I don't think that Ruby directly copied from Python, but like
Of course.
Perl and Python and Ruby were all kind of like copying this Unix pattern of like make, configure, make, install, and then just like
Yep.
kind of creating their own script that was like
Okay.
Ruby configure, Ruby make, install. Uh,
Wow.
and so you would end up with, almost exactly like that. You would end up with a bunch of .rb files in, user local somewhere, and
Okay.
like install versions, uninstall. None of those things existed. Um, and so, as a kind of like hacking project during a RubyConf, the very first version of Ruby Gems was born. And I guess, in classic Ruby tradition, they thought of the name that was both kind of correct, but also like a joke at the same time. And so instead of .tar.gz or whatever, it was .gem. And you just kind of like built enough Ruby code that could download the .gem and untar it and copy the files into a place that was in the Ruby load path.
Yeah.
And that was the first version of Ruby Gems, right? It was like, oh, well, we'll just add a load path for each individual package, and then if you want to uninstall, you can just like remove the directory for that package
Okay.
and know that you only deleted the one package worth of files.
Okay.
Um, it was really nice, right? It was a huge
Yep,
upgrade
yep,
from
definitely.
we
Yeah,
piled all of our .rb files in one place, right?
yeah.
Which is what everyone was doing before that.
Yeah, and everybody does their own thing. This is how it happens. Like I create my own script. You think you're smarter, you do your own. So definitely not
Exactly.
standardizing everything. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And honestly, it was pretty successful. They forked the SourceForge code base and made a
Okay.
thing that they called RubyForge. Um, and so you could apply for a RubyForge project, and somebody would, click the approve button, and then you would get a little,
Okay.
forked SourceForge project. This was before GitHub. This was before hosting really existed, right? And so
Okay.
SourceForge was kind of like the best thing that you could have in terms of this can host the code, this can host conversations about the code, this can host the .gem itself.
Yeah.
Um, and
Makes
so
sense.
for a long time, RubyGems.org was just this Ruby fork of SourceForge. Um, and you could say gem install something, and it would install that thing. And it was honestly that was great,
Perfect.
right? Like
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
started using Ruby kind of like before RubyGems had fully caught on, and it meant that sometimes when I wanted to use a library, I had to like find the homepage of the library author so that I could download a tarball so that I could hand decompress it so that I could install the .rb files so that I could require them. And like in comparison to that, just running like gem install was
Yeah.
amazing. It was so
Yeah.
good.
I can imagine.
Um, yeah, it was
Yeah.
fantastic. Uh,
I think.
and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a good way to start a project. Like, maybe like in a different, you've seen something similar in a different programming language, and you say, okay, let's try to bring this on, and you try to maybe shoot for like feature parity or at least whatever you need, and then at some point you kind of figure out like, hey, we need to go our own way. We know we need this, and that, so it's okay.
Mhm.
We're not gonna need that anymore. Thank you so much. You helped a lot, but we're gonna do our own thing. So yeah, it's a good way
Yep,
to get
exactly.
started. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, kind of like by the late 2000s, people had better ways of hosting source code. Everybody was starting to get into using Git. GitHub was very, kind of like
Yeah.
baby GitHub had just started to exist. Um, and and for and I guess this is around when Nick Quaranto, who was working at Thoughtbot at the time, was like, it just seems ridiculous to me that RubyForge is written in, I don't even remember, PHP or something. Like I feel like we're good at writing web apps in Ruby. Like we should write a Ruby gems that's in Ruby. Um, and
Right.
so while he was working at Thoughtbot, he created Gem Cutter, is what it was called originally,
Okay.
because RubyGems.org was like still this SourceForge fork thing. And
Okay.
so for a long time, you would have to manually reconfigure RubyGems to use Gem Cutter
Jim.
instead. Um,
Okay.
but Gem Cutter did this really great thing, which is that it offered, since it was written in Rails, it offered an API. And so there was a plugin for RubyGems that just let you manage your gems directly from the gem command. You could say like
Okay.
gem owner add, or like gem
Publish.
push, like all of
Yeah.
that stuff was like fully built into the like basically the gem cutter plugin for Ruby gems meant that you could manage everything about your gem just from the gem command. It was really great.
Which is good.
It was like a big improvement on what we had before, right? You
Yep.
didn't have to apply for your project to get it approved. You could just gem push,
Yep.
all these things. Um, and so by the late 2000s, and I'm probably going to get these dates wrong, but like around 2008-ish, the Ruby Central folks. So I guess this is now a good time to explain the origins of Ruby Central. So basically the same set of folks, Rich Kilmer, Chad Fowler, David Black, some help from Jim Wyrick, they were extremely active with Ruby itself, and they like kind of put together the first version of RubyGems, but they were also the organizers of the Ruby conference, the like American Ruby conference, right? RubyConf. And so within a few years, they set up a nonprofit to act as the like organizing company for the Ruby conference. And by 2006 or so, there was enough interest in Rails for there to be a Rails conference. And so RubyCentral sort of like worked together with the Rails folks and put together RailsConf in 2006. I went there, I met some great folks at the first RailsConf. That was how I got my first job at a company that used Ruby. It was a really good time. And so like around that era, right, between 2006 and maybe 2010, the interesting, significant things that happened were RubyCentral realized that GemCutter was just better than RubyForge and said, hey, could we make RubyGems.org just be GemCutter instead? And Nick very graciously kind of like donated GemCutter to RubyCentral and continued to help maintain and support it for many years after that. And GemCutter became the official RubyGems.org. And in fact, that was so successful that still today, RubyGems.org is running that code base, like the thing that was GemCutter in 2005 or whenever that was. We're still using that same Rails app, which I'm amazed that it has continued to work, right? Like that's great.
Exactly.
It's running on the, like we've kept upgrading it to the newest version of Rails. It's running on the newest version of Ruby. It's like still working and successful. And so also in that same time period, the, kind of like in my mind, the thing that meant that people started thinking about Bundler was MERB and Rails 3. And so, Rails 2 was this very kind of like single block made out of interlocking pieces. And you needed all of the pieces to interlock with each other to have Rails work. And so some people who wanted a more modular thing basically said like, what if we make a new framework, but that's really just like separate things that we kind of like glue together in the middle. And then you can only use the pieces that you want to use. And that was the idea behind MERB, which I think was originally short for just Mongrel plus ERB, and like Mongrel was the predecessor to Puma, right? It was just like a web server and some ERB, and that's a web framework. And MERB, right? And so MERB, with this idea of modularity and being able to pick and choose which parts you wanted to use, started picking up kind of like popularity and gaining steam. And at some point, it became this thing where like people really wanted to use parts of Rails with MERB, and it was a challenge, right? Because Rails 2 was still this like very interlocked thing without much modularity. And so at some point there was kind of like a summit between the main people working on MERB and the main people working on Rails, and kind of like the conclusion was Rails could sort of like pull in this modularity concept from MERB, and the MERB team would join the Rails team. And so you wouldn't, it would keep the community from fragmenting, but it would provide the modularity that the folks who were like interested in switching to MERB were looking for. And that had kind of like one big immediate impact, which was Rails became many, many gems, right? Where, like Rails 2, it was like 4 or 5 gems, but they were all in the one repo, and you always used all of them together. There was no like picking and choosing. And so the big, kind of like architectural change of Rails 3 was theoretically, you could turn off any of the pieces, right? You don't
Yeah.
want active record, that's fine. All the rest of
Perfect.
Rails works without it. You don't
Yep.
want, like you want to replace action view, that's fine. The
Yep.
rest of Rails works without it. And the thing that happened, and this had started to happen in Merb, was if you're pulling together a bunch of different unrelated libraries, it actually becomes challenging to get all of them to work together,
In sync.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, like, what if this upgrades, but this doesn't upgrade, or this makes a change and this hasn't been updated to work with that change, and so you need the versions that still work together. And so the Merb team had created a script basically that was like, check to see if all of my gems say that they work together.
Okay.
And that, as Merb kind of like became Rails 3, it became clear that Rails 3 apps were going to need something that was better than like the rake script that Rails had
Yep.
to like auto install some gems.
Yep. Yep.
And
Gotcha.
of course, the fun thing about the rake script is that you might not have the gems that you needed to load the rake task that was going to install the gems.
Okay.
So it was this
Okay.
great circular thing. And so the kind of like philosophy that the Bundler team ended up with out of that, and this is actually when I joined, was like, wow, Bundler was kind of like getting figured out, right? I think I started working on Bundler around maybe like 0.4.
Okay.
And we progressively kind of like tried experiments, and we were like, is it good this way? Is it,
Of
like,
course.
what,
Yep.
actually
What
there are
works?
these problems, so we're going to
Yep.
completely change, and so we sort of dramatically changed how Bundler worked maybe like 4 or 5 times before landing on the
Yeah.
final version that we actually shipped with Rails 3. And but the whole time, the idea behind it, the thing that we were trying to provide to the people using this new modular version of Rails, what we wanted was, you should be able to install the same gems everywhere
Yeah.
for this app.
Gotcha.
And that was so hard at the time. Like today, everybody's used
Yeah.
Bundler
Everybody
for,
has.
many,
Yeah.
many years. And it's just like, of course, that's how it works. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Of
like
course.
saying you
Yeah.
wouldn't use source control or something, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
course you check
Exactly.
in your files. Of
Yeah.
course you have, like a file that means that you always get the same gems everywhere at the
Yep.
same time.
Yep.
But
Yep.
at the time, it was very controversial. And like, there were enormous internet comment arguments of like, but Bundler's harder to use. This is totally unnecessary. Like,
Wow.
it can create all of these errors that you have to debug that no one understands. Dependency graphs are very complicated. Every Rails app today works just fine without this, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was
I can see that.
kind of true, right? Like, all the Rails apps did work for some
Yeah.
value of work.
Yep.
But I guess I personally had an experience at this job at the company that I started working at after the first RailsConf. I hunted down a bug where in my code, we would just randomly get an error, an exception report, but not very often, right? So it was clear it wasn't
That's
happening
perfect.
every time. And I just, I spent literally a month looking into this on and off. And I finally figured out that it only ever happened on one of the servers.
That wasn't using.
And it was a different version. It was the
Okay.
server we set up later. And
Okay.
so it was running version 1.1.4 of some gem, where every other server was running 1.1.2. And
Gotcha.
so if your request was just randomly load balanced onto this server, and it was this
It was cool.
specific request, it would always fail. But you would try again, and it would get load balanced to a different server, and then it would succeed.
That's perfect to
And
debug. Yeah, that's a
so,
perfect problem.
right, it was so frustrating to realize that just having set up the servers at different times meant that one server worked and one server didn't. Um, and so when I heard about Bundler, like immediately I was like, that's so
That's
smart. This
yep.
completely fixes my problem.
We should
Like
have
a
that.
month of my life down the drain.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
never again. I want it. And so I was fully, convinced coming into it that this was a good idea that was necessary just because of that experience that I had had. Um, and so
That
yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
I have a question. Like, but were there other package managers? I would like to say like the modern package managers, like npm. Yarn probably wasn't around, but was npm around? Was there anything you could, you know,
No.
get
There
inspiration
was there
from?
was not.
Yeah.
So what we I guess what we ended up calling it a dependency manager rather than a package manager,
Okay.
trying to figure out how to communicate what the
Yep.
difference was, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I think today it is considered a requirement for a package manager to include a dependency manager, right?
Okay.
Like
Yep. Yep.
uh,
Of course.
npm, yarn, cargo,
It manages everything
the
for you.
exactly the C sharp one, NuGet, like all of those package managers, they include dependency managers.
Yeah.
Like they will make sure that every one of your packages works together with every other package that you have,
Yep.
and usually they'll write out a lock file of some
Yeah.
kind.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
none of that existed.
Yeah.
So the closest thing that there was at the time was there was like CPAN and RubyGems, and there was like the PHP package manager,
Yeah. Pair.
Pair, I
Pair.
think. Yeah,
Yeah.
Pair.
And
But
it's
all
not the
of these
same.
package managers didn't include this idea of the dependencies of an
Yep.
application, right?
Yep.
Like if
Yep.
you cared about that, you had to like write the list yourself. And
Yep.
so uh, I guess Python had the requirements.txt file,
Yep.
which was this weird middle ground. It was kind of like having a gem file, but not having
But
Bundler.
exactly, yeah. Yep, yep, I know.
Uh,
And you
and
write you put the
so,
versions and everything inside, yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so we ended up uh, deciding that the computer should be doing that work for you, right? Like if all you have is a list of versions, and there was a I want to say it was called like it might have even been called Gem Bundler, Gem Installer. I don't remember the name exactly, but there was a gem that let you create a list very similar to requirements.txt,
Okay.
and it would try to install all of those gems for you in a like semi automated way. And what we concluded was the risk of kind of like upgrading one thing and then getting the whole system out of whack and then having to spend hours like manually figuring out what didn't match and like basically like being a human dependency
Yep.
resolver was
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
like our nightmare scenario, and we wanted to make sure that no one would be stuck with that. And so the Bundler philosophy was you should just say what you want, and then Bundler will figure out how to make that happen. And that was the idea that was completely new.
Nice. Nice. That sounds so
Um,
good. Yeah, that sounds very
yeah.
Ruby and very Railsy. You know, you just tell it what you
Mhm.
want and it'll do it for you. Yep.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Make the
I'm
computer
listening
do
to
the
Yeah.
this.
tricky, complicated, many steps, hard work, right?
Yeah.
It
And
sounds like a
so,
horror story to me.
and that actually worked, right? Like within a few years, Bundler was no longer controversial. It was no longer like tons of
Yeah.
arguments about this on the internet. It was just people being like, "Oh yeah, this is helpful. Great,
Exactly.
thanks." Uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. And then we discovered that the problem was Bundler. We sort of became the victims of our own success,
Okay.
where more people installed more gems thanks to Bundler, and over time it increased the traffic to rubygems.org, and so it very slowly started to overwhelm the servers.
Okay.
And
which
so
which is a good problem to have if you're a startup, you know.
absolutely, it's a good problem to have if you're a startup, and it's a horrible problem to have if it's a free service that you provide with only
Yep,
like unpaid volunteers doing all
yep,
of the work.
yep, yep.
Um, so in that
Yeah.
era, we ended up getting some kind of like hosting sponsorship from Heroku to help, kind of like offload this API that Bundler was starting to. I sometimes joke we DDoSed ourselves
Yeah,
by making Bundler a client that made these, kind of expensive requests where we would like do some database queries. Uh, so it was difficult to cache effectively because it was like just for this person's gem file. Here's some information, and right. And so over time, eventually we Ruby gems went down and we were like, oh no, that's weird. What happened? And we brought it back up and it immediately went down again. And we realized there were so many bundler users constantly trying to make requests and we just didn't have enough capacity.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And did Bundler have the gem file and the gem file lock at that time?
yes.
Yes. Okay.
So the lock file, I guess like this difference between the gem file where you say what you want and the
Yep.
lock file that says how to make that happen was kind of like the core idea of Bundler, right? Like the way that
Yep.
it was different from everything that had come before it. And
Yeah.
so the very like that ultimately wound up being kind of like the the center of the bundler that we shipped as 1.0 was, you know, this is the one idea.
Yep.
You write a gem file, you get a
Yep.
gem file.lock, and now every developer and every server
It's the
actually
same
has
thing.
the same gems on them. Right,
Yep.
right,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah. This is cool. I
Yeah.
remember I come from PHP and the package manager, the modern one is Composer. It's
Hmm.
quite good nowadays. It was a little bit slow at some point, but I remember there were forum entries and people asking like, should I commit my composer.log file? Because it changes every time I do like a composer reinstall or something like. And like you said, like people didn't know. Like now it's a given. You know that you have to commit that.
Right.
They have to commit that. Everything just works. That it's a
Yep.
non-issue. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I guess to kind of like answer that question that you asked up front, like Bundler and Ruby gems, like did they come from the same place? How did this happen? Like it was actually very controversial, and the people who thought that everything was fine were very against Bundler. And
Gotcha.
so there was actually like the very first version of Bundler was intended to be a gem plugin where you would have like run gem bundle and it would have like done all the bundler stuff. But the Ruby Gems team at the time was very insistent that everything was fine the way it was and that Bundler was a bunch of unnecessary complexity. And
Gotcha.
so Bundler actually ended up more closely associated with Rails because it was kind of like getting built in parallel with the Rails 3 modularity project from the MERB team.
Gotcha.
Um, and then later, like a few years after Bundler came out, once it was no longer controversial, that was when the Bundler team and the Ruby Gems team got together and we were kind of like, yeah, maybe this should actually be like one project because we're doing
Okay.
a lot of overlapping duplicate work, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And I mean, I think it ended up probably taking like 5 years after we agreed that it should probably be one project, but eventually that did happen. Bundler and Ruby Gems are today, kind of like their one repo. They're released together. They're maintained by the same people. So like today, Bundler and Ruby Gems are kind of like aspects of the same project.
Yep.
Um, but it took lots of years of like very
Of
slowly
course.
and incrementally bringing them together after everyone agreed that that made sense.
I think many like programming languages and projects have this like fog of war period where no, we don't know quite exactly what this is, and then okay, this is perfect. We know exactly what we want to shoot. Yeah.
Right,
It's
exactly. And you know, and I understand that, right? Like if it's a completely unproven concept that isn't in wide use yet, maybe you don't want to put that in your tool that everyone uses, right? Maybe it
Yep.
would lead
Yep.
to
Yep.
instability, lead
Yep.
to bugs, cause a lot of problems, and maybe it won't actually get wide adoption, and maybe it won't
Exactly.
be,
Yeah.
right? Like, and
Let's just
so,
wait for others to do it, and we'll figure it out as we
right,
go. Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Makes
Um,
sense.
and so,
I started
so
working
we
with Windows
definitely did
Rails only in
end up doing that.
Oh,
2015. I don't think you hear me. Do you hear me, guys? No?
Yeah,
yes. Yes. We can hear you.
yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that
Oh,
I myself started
maybe
working with
we
Ruby on
aren't
Rails.
audible.
What? Yeah, I was saying that I started
The
working with
internet
Ruby
gods
on
are not with
Rails.
us today.
What are you
Oh,
saying,
maybe not.
Adrian?
Oh,
Hey? Yeah.
Okay. We're
bummer.
losing you here.
Oh
Yeah,
my God,
it's
it's
kind of
so
flaking in and
frustrating.
out. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Never mind.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll let you
Okay.
talk.
I'll continue this. So this brings us a little bit. Yeah. This brings us to like how is the Ruby Gems infrastructure organized right now? Um,
Yeah.
is it still a Heroku? Are you using cloud? Who pays for
Yeah,
everything? Tell us a little bit about
absolutely.
like all of that.
Yeah. So, so back in the foggy early days, before clouds were even a thing, really, right? Like this is
Yeah.
pre Ruby Gems is
Yep.
older than AWS, and
Yep.
so uh, very early on, it was just like somebody spun up a VPS somewhere, and we put Ruby Gems in it, and eventually the traffic got too big, and that
It
VPS
crashed.
was very sad, and right. Um, and so yeah, I guess the timing actually fits. So this is really interesting. So one of the things that happened is, it was run entirely by volunteers. We we had it kind of like, just stable enough. We had the most complicated dynamic stuff running on a separate set of Heroku dynos, and
Okay.
and kind of like the original VPS was still running kind of like the core service, like where
Okay.
you would publish gems to it and it would serve those gems, and then kind of like the bundler specific complicated query stuff ran on this side service on Heroku. Um, and and then there was uh, a remote code execution bug in Rails. And this is all now like fascinating history trivia, but it kind of boiled down to marshalling and YAMLing objects,
Yep.
serializing them, and
Yep.
then deserializing them can sometimes trigger code execution because
Okay.
some objects run code in their initializers, right?
Okay.
And so if they're, and it's not even nefarious necessarily, right? Maybe it's a config
Yeah.
object and the
Yep.
config object evaluates a block or something like
Yep.
that, right?
Yep. Yep. But
Um,
but it crashes.
but if you put that config object into YAML and then you pull it back out of YAML, the block gets evaluated. And so if you like hand write some YAML that's like, oh, what's in that block? What's in that block is send me all your passwords.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Definitely.
then you like send it to Rails, and Rails is like, oh, this is a config object. Oh, I just sent all of my passwords from this server to the person who sent me this YAML file. And so that was that was a really big deal at the time.
Yeah.
Um, all the like the big shops that used Rails, which at the time it was like Square and Stripe and Twitter and GitHub. We're all like frantically trying to make sure that they had
Okay.
patched this execution bug. And for RubyGems, we patched the Rails issue, right? Like we
Okay.
applied the patch, all safe. You can't just send YAML to the Rails endpoint and Rails won't do the code execution thing. And then in our little like RubyGems chat, someone was like, gem specs have our YAML. Like what's inside the .gem is a
Yep.
YAML file. Like,
Okay.
do you think maybe you could like craft a malicious .gem that you could push to RubyGems,
Wow.
and then RubyGems would run the code? And we were like, you probably can, but all of us have day jobs and it's like Tuesday
Who
afternoon.
cares?
So well, I mean, it was very much like we should look at this sometime soon, but like we're
But
all pretty
hopefully,
busy.
yeah.
Right. Hopefully it's probably fine. Nothing bad has happened yet. We'll, whoever has some free time first, this evening or this weekend or something, like let's definitely put that at the top of our list to look at, because if it is bad, it would be pretty bad. And like Thursday afternoon, uh, the Etsy passwords file for the VPS showed up on Pastebin.
Wow.
Uh, so it turned out someone had rooted the server using this remote
Vulnerability. Yeah.
execution YAML thing, had figured out the RubyGems only way to exploit it, and had succeeded. And so what we actually had to do was turn off RubyGems.
Okay.
Like we just had to destroy that entire server because
Yep.
who
Yep.
knows? Like we can't, right? We couldn't be
Yep.
positive that it hadn't been,
Exactly.
backdoored somehow. And then we had to download every gem from S3 and check some to see if they had replaced
Yep.
a gem with malware,
Yep.
right?
Wow. Wow.
Maybe the newest version of Rails was now actually a
Backdoor.
virus.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep.
Could be,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like they had access to the credentials, right?
Yep.
And so RubyGems was actually down for like 3 days because we had to build a completely new infrastructure.
VPS.
We had to build all the new servers from scratch. We didn't have automation for the VPS that we had to tear down.
Nobody knew
like
how it worked. Yeah, everything that had
right,
installed.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it took several days to do this combination of build a completely new deployment environment, check all of the .gems on S3 to make sure that none of them had been, replaced with malware, and a lot of companies had entire engineering teams that just basically couldn't do anything for 2 days, right? Like new developer, I guess try and figure out how to copy the .gems from another developer's machine because you can't install them from RubyGems. New server to deploy to, try to copy from the other server because you can't install them from Ruby. It's just like so many things. Such a huge productivity hit. And we eventually got it back up. It turned out that all of those gems were safe. None of them had actually been replaced. That was when we migrated into AWS. This was like 2012, 2013, something like that.
Okay.
So we were, we had more automated server stuff,
processes,
it was like more modern.
Yeah.
We had, automated configuration management. Probably we were using Puppet or Chef or something at that point. So new cloud servers, new infrastructure, all of that stuff.
But that was after the 3 days after you just made it work and put it back online and everything, right? Not the 3 days.
Right. So, I mean, the
AWS thing.
Like the initial version was basically just like switching to deploying it into EC2 instead of, like a handcrafted VPS with no scripts, right? It was like everything was hand installed, everything was hand deployed, And it was like,
Yeah.
no, we're gonna have a script that builds an image, and we put the image on EC2, and then there's a script that puts the files into the running EC2 image, and if we have to delete it, we'll have it up again in an hour.
Nice.
Um,
Nice. Nice.
and so the many things were improved by that, and also sadly at the same time, uh, everyone who frantically helped with that for the 3 days that RubyGems was down, uh, we all kind of burned out because we had to take 3 days of PTO,
Wow.
and during our PTO we were working 14 hours a day,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and right, like at the end of that you need a vacation to recover from your
The
vacation, in
stress and
giant
everything.
air
Yeah. Yeah.
quotes,
Yeah.
right, exactly. And none of us got paid for that, right? Like none of us worked at companies where the company was like, oh yes, this is very important, we want you to do this as part of your job. We all worked at companies that were like, well, we would also like Ruby Gems to be up, but like
But
it's
we
not like
have other thing.
intrinsic to us, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like we have a business that we would like to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's
so
sad. That's a little
that,
bit sad and different from
yeah,
what's happening today with Ruby and
right,
everything. Yeah.
right, exactly. And so we had this kind of like sad and frustrating experience where we heard from people who were like, my boss said that I can work full time on Ruby Gems now while it's down. And we were like, that's nice, but like you don't know anything that is helpful to us.
Ye-
And we're not gonna like give you admin access to the new servers that we need to set up, because that's a terrible, like a stranger
Yeah.
walks up and says, I'll help. And you're like, sorry,
Of course.
we're trying to fix the security problem, not create a
Yeah.
new one, right?
Exactly.
Um, and and so after we had Ruby Gems back up, uh, we got back to some of those people and we were like, it would be so helpful for you to, help, because now the three of us who did this for free around the clock are like totally burned out and exhausted. And unfortunately, all of those managers were like, oh, Ruby Gems is back up now. You need to get back to your like real job.
Yep. Yep.
We're not going to pay you to help with Ruby Gems now. Like now it's up. Um, and so, kind of like coming from that experience, that was my motivation to eventually, like a year or two later, start RubyTogether, um, which was a nonprofit just about solving this one problem of like, how do we keep,
Ruby
Ruby
Gems alive.
Gems working? Yeah,
Yeah.
how do we keep it up? Like, how do we
Yep.
keep it
Yep.
working?
Yep.
Um, and uh, I had realized that at that time I was the last person actively working on Bundler, and we had one other person actively working on Ruby Gems, and I was like, there's one each. Like if we get new jobs or we,
Get
something
sick.
happens, it suddenly goes to zero, and that does not
Yeah.
sound sustainable. Um, and so, right, so RubyTogether was a nonprofit with this very narrow mission of uh, ask lots of Ruby companies for a little bit of money so that we can pay developers to maintain Bundler and Ruby Gems, right? Like
Yeah.
we would like it to
Okay.
not go down, and we
Yep.
would like more than the one person to know how to keep it working, right?
Yep.
Um,
And how did that
exactly.
go?
And uh, it went better than I was worried it would, and not as good as I hoped it would. Uh,
Not
and
not
so,
not bad, not great, not terrible.
right, I think not great, not terrible is exactly how it went. We did raise some money. We did pay some developers. We never raised enough money to hire anyone full time. Um, but we did raise enough money to pay a few people to have kind of like this side project of maintaining Ruby Gems and Bundler. And
Nice.
so that's, like that's a lot better than only
Yep.
volunteers and only
Yep.
one volunteer each. It's a lot worse than, say, the situation Python is in, where they have like more than one full-time person whose job includes keeping the package manager working, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so, uh, and so we weren't really sure where to go from there, or if it was possible, where to go from there. And around, so let's see, so Ruby Together started in 2015, and so by like 2019, uh, we were kind of like, does this mean that we need to do more than just this very narrow, like,
Yep.
ask for some money, pay some developers, and at the same time, RubyCentral, which had stuck very narrowly to just the conferences, was also asking itself, like, should we be doing more than just the conferences? Should we be trying to like figure out other ways to support the community that aren't just run RailsConf, run RubyConf?
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so we ended up, kind of like joining together, right? Like
Nice.
what happened in the end is we literally merged together into
Merged.
one
Yeah.
nonprofit, and both boards, like the boards of directors at both nonprofits were kind of like, oh, this is actually a pretty good
Makes
fit.
sense.
Like Ruby Together is thinking about more community stuff beyond just like paying
RubyGems.
for, this very narrow thing. And RubyCentral is thinking about more, like maybe, memberships that are not just about Ruby Gems, but are also about like community events, like regional conferences, meetups, trying to like figure out how to support the community more broadly in addition to running the conferences. Um, and so I honestly, I feel like that has actually worked out really well.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yep.
the new Ruby Central is now trying to become like a more not just running the conference, but also like a community like support system, right? And
Yep.
part of
Yep.
one of the things that the community uses that can use support is RubyGems and Bundler and
RubyGems.
like the whole system there.
Yep.
And then the other things, the conferences, the regional conferences, the meetups, like all of those things, they kind of like track together.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, and it's pretty early still. Like we've really only been like working hard on this kind of like new together version of things, just like in this year. But we're making progress, and I'm very excited to, like as we figure out more ways to like support the Ruby community overall, right? Like I'm
Yep.
very excited about that.
Yep.
And so to kind of like get all the way to the end of your question, the way that it works today is RubyCentral is ultimately kind of like the final responsible party, right? Like if there's RubyCentral coordinates the different companies that kind of like donate money or services or servers or
Yep.
products or whatever, and ultimately if there isn't uh, credits or isn't comp servers, like it's RubyCentral that's kind of like putting
Have to pick
itself
that.
up there to foot the bill.
Yep.
And the servers themselves run on AWS. Amazon, uh, most of the time, we're able to coordinate to get credits from Amazon. And so I think like, uh, I think this year it took us a month or two to get things together, but like most months, we have about $10,000 worth of AWS credits that covers the costs of like all of the, VMs and the costs of the
Yep.
load balancers and all of that kind of stuff, the S3 buckets. Um, and then the other really huge infrastructural cost is donated by Fastly. So Fastly, as the
CDN.
CDN, like they
Yep.
provide local servers around the world, and they serve a lot of traffic.
Okay.
last time I looked at our traffic numbers,
Mm.
we serve about 10 million unique clients per month. And like we're counting by IPs. You can't really count
Yep,
individual
yep,
people.
yep. I know, I know.
But about 10 million
It's
unique IPs per month,
it's
and
a nice number.
we serve about 2 billion gems per month.
Wow,
Um, so in any given month, we're serving a couple billion gems,
nice.
and uh, and I guess like obviously, if we were paying Fastly, we would have like some fancy enterprise contract worked out, and so this isn't exactly correct.
Yep.
But if we were paying full retail price, it would be $500,000 a month.
Wow. Wow.
Um,
That's a huge number. Huge number for
yeah,
something that's free. And it should just be
yes,
there. It should just run. It should run fast. And yeah. Yeah.
right, yeah. And so one thing that I am really proud of is that since RubyTogether started, since we've been paying for maintainers, uh, we have not had any full outages where like the service goes 100% offline, the database falls over or whatever. Um, like we've definitely sometimes had degraded service or it's gotten a little overloaded or,
Of course.
like
Of course.
occasional errors, but uh, we have not had a single incident like the time we DDoSed ourselves or like the time that we got hacked and
Yeah.
had to be down for 3 days. Um, none of that like significant outage type thing has happened. And it's been 8 years. So I
That's
feel very proud
congrats.
of
Yep.
the team that has been maintaining this to keep it operating. We typically manage like 4 or 5 nines in any given year, and we've
Okay.
had no 100% outages, just kind of like
Yeah.
slow
Down
requests
totally.
or
Yep.
scattered errors.
Yep.
And if you eventually keep trying, you'll get through.
You'll get it. You'll get the jump.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hey, that's amazing.
uh,
Congrats. Congrats.
yeah, yeah.
So at some
Um,
point you were the only one that had the keys to RubyGems and Bundler. How many people
uh,
are working now on the repos, on the infrastructure, uh, full-time, part-time? I know there are people that still do it as volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. So nowadays, uh, I guess what I would call probably the infrastructure team that like works on AWS and works on, kind of like with the Terraform, Fastly, load balancing, Kubernetes, all of that stuff. That team is loosely speaking like 4 or 5 people, and all of them are getting, like they're part of the kind of like crew of paid for at least a few hours a week worth of maintenance.
Okay.
Um, the kind of like broader team that works on Ruby Gems, kind of like including the Rails app and including like the code that builds the server information for Bundler and Ruby Gems to consume, all of that. Um, I would say that crew is probably closer to like 10 or 15 people who are all, kind of like maybe I would say there's like around uh and I guess I don't want to give the wrong impression here, right? Like there's like 10 or 15 people who contribute. There have been zero people doing this full time, right? And
Gotcha.
so it's like uh historically, like RubyTogether was able to pay somewhere between, like maybe at our smallest, it was maybe like 2 people for 3 hours a week. And maybe at our biggest, it was like 5 people for 5 hours a week,
Wow.
right?
That
Like,
that's not a lot.
right, it's not a lot. We have definitely been kind of like keeping all this going in very much of like a uh,
Frugality.
tiny tiny shoestring budget kind of situation. So I am happy to report that uh, the combination of joining things together into RubyCentral, so it's like less confusing, right? Like there's only
Yep.
one nonprofit. It's kind of like
Yep.
clear what that nonprofit is doing. There is a new office in the German government called the Sovereign Tech Fund, and they have
Okay.
been very supportive of RubyGems. I guess their mission is to support what they call uh, like open source infrastructure, or
Okay.
around the world. And so they have supported projects like curl or WireGuard or like OpenSSL, OpenPGP, and I guess RubyGems is kind of like underlying enough projects with
Yep.
enough downstream users that they have also supported us as well, and that has gotten us to our I think our brief all-time record, which I think was about 2.5 people on a short-term contract full time.
Okay. Congrats.
um, yeah, yeah. So that was previously our kind of like all-time high record of people working on Ruby Gems was this
Okay.
short-term contract of like 2.5 people. Um, and so what we're working on now is kind of like coming up with we're basically like trying to find companies, both like that government group and other you know uh, tech companies that depend on Ruby or
Yep.
whose customers depend on Ruby, um, who are able to support, kind of like RubyCentral that in turn supports people working
Yep.
on Ruby Gems. And so what we're really hoping we can do is get to the point of like maybe 2 people whose full-time job it is to
Yep.
keep all of this infrastructure functional, right? Like
Yep. Yep. Yep.
that would be amazing. That is definitely not where we're at yet. We're gonna keep working towards that, for the time being, with the generous support of kind of like Ruby Central's memberships, and with the funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund. We could hire maybe exactly one person full time, but then
Yeah.
you worry about like what if that one person gets sick? That's like not It's like
Back at
not a
square
good
one.
plan if there's exactly. And so instead what we've chosen to do is, like if our resources are like one full-time person or less, we want to make sure that
They are
instead what
spread
we're doing
out.
is spreading it across several
Yep.
people who
Yep.
are doing this as kind of like a side project usually, right? Like
Yep. Yep. Yep.
most of the folks getting paid to help maintain Ruby Gems and Bundler like have a regular job,
Yep.
doing some kind of programming, and then this is their kind of like nights or weekends or side gig.
Yep.
Um,
I
and
see.
and that at least gets us to the point where there are people who can cover for each other. Like with this additional funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund, we started, or I guess uh, there was a combination. So Shopify also signed up for a like long-term contribution of I would need to look at the announcement to be 100% sure. I think it was something like $200,000 a year, $250,000 a year, and so like that's like
Good.
around enough to pay for one
Yep.
person,
Yep.
like
Yep. Yep.
the
Yep.
ballpark. And so instead, what we did, like I was saying, we split it across several
Spread. Yep.
people,
Yep. Yep.
and then once we had a little additional funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund, we established a full 24/7 on call rotation. Um,
Gotcha.
and so
That's good.
that is like a very exciting thing, like this, increased support from the combination of members and Shopify and the Sovereign Tech Fund. And now we're able to fund, it's not just volunteers that we hope will wake up. It's
Yep.
someone whose actual job is they have agreed to be on call, and And this is actually really great. One of the great things about Ruby is that people use it all around the world. One of the great things about having a 24/7 on-call rotation is if you have people
Have
all
people
around the
everywhere.
world, no one has to be on call in the middle of the night. And
Yep,
so
yep,
we
yep.
have actually succeeded. We have,
Nice,
like we have a main rotation of 4 people, and they are all in different, like they're, like one's
nice
Australia, one's the US, one's Europe, one's India. And so that gives us like full coverage, but only
coverage.
while people are awake,
Yep, that's
which is
perfect.
really great. It's a
It's easier.
huge.
It's easier to solve problems when you're not just waking up and trying to
Yeah,
figure out.
exactly. Like
I know.
3 a.m. is the worst time
Yeah,
to try and solve a problem, right?
I
Like,
know.
yeah,
I know. I
exactly.
know. I know.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
cool. Tell us. So you told us what like big companies, big organizations can help you. How can the little folks help you? Are you looking for other volunteers? Are you not looking anymore to get volunteers involved? How can the little folk help?
Yeah, absolutely. So there, kind of like breaking it down, loosely speaking, there's like a few roles that I think we can always use more of. So like uh, at this exact moment, we're not going to insert anyone new into the like 24/7 on call rotation,
Yep.
but there's always like maintenance that needs to be done. There's always, like things have gone out of date and need to be updated. There's always features that are confusing or features that have bugs, and like
Yep.
there's always more work to do on software than there are people to do it, right?
Yep.
Um, and so we absolutely could use and would love help from anyone who has, kind of like availability or capacity to do that. Um, I gave a conference talk and then later turned it into a blog post on my blog, kind of like how to it's how to contribute to open source, but the subtitle is like how to get onto any core team in 15 minutes a day.
That's
And like
perfect.
the
That's a good one.
the secret is, you just kind of like show up and you like read the tickets and you try and help out.
Yep.
And if you show up and you read the tickets and you try to help out for a long time,
Yep.
eventually you will be one of the most helpful people on that project and you will be on the
Exactly.
core team
Yep.
because,
Yep. Yep.
like that's
You know
just
everything,
over
how
time, that's
everything
how it
works.
happens. Right.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Makes
Um,
sense.
so we would absolutely love more, like anyone who has time and interest and wants to help out with those things, or anyone who has, kind of like things that bug them or things that they
Yeah.
think could be better, right? Like,
Come and
absolutely,
fix
we would
it.
love to.
Come and help
Exactly,
us
come
fix it.
fix
Yep.
it. Come talk with us about it. Come tell us how life could be better for everyone using Bundler, right? Like we would
Yep.
we
Yep.
would absolutely love to improve the
Yep.
life
Yep.
of every Ruby developer, right?
Yep.
Um, and then for people who maybe don't have enough time to volunteer, uh, even if you're like just one person, but you want to support this work that Ruby Central is doing, Ruby Central has paid memberships, and they start at like just like a few bucks a month, and they go all the way up through I'm a giant company and have thousands of dollars.
Okay.
Uh, and so we we take those memberships, actively funnel money into the budget for us to pay developers to maintain RubyGems and Bundler. And
Gotcha.
so like if and this is very common, right? Like if you as a company need all of your hard-earned developers to work on
Yep.
your business, then you can kick us some dollars and we'll, group all those dollars together and,
And
you know, uh,
and have
hire
it
you a
working.
fraction of a developer, basically,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
Keep it
Yep.
keep
Yep.
it all
Yep.
maintained, keep it working.
Yeah.
Um, and then,
Sounds.
kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then at a higher level, we would love to engage with everyone using these tools about things that could be better, right? Like one of the big things. So this is now kind of getting into the answer to your question about like how does it work? Who decides how, what you work on, that kind of
Yep.
stuff. So uh, ultimately, what we do is we have a huge list of things that we would like to do, right? It's kind of like, oh, people suggested this, or we thought of it, or,
The
and
backlog.
I personally have been adding things to this list for 10 years. There are some things on the backlog that I put in it 10 years ago, and we haven't
Still
done them
there.
yet, and still hope that one day that will happen. Um, and and so ultimately what we're doing with that is trying to, like we have kind of like tiers that we prioritize things in, right? And so it's
Yep.
like, well, if we have, two people at 5 hours a week, probably everything that we work on is going to be keep it from going down, right?
Yep.
It's just like
Yep.
keep it up to date so there's no security holes, upgrade the, just keep
Yep.
everything maintained and working
Yep.
smoothly. Um, and as we build out, kind of like more capacity, we've started to get into like, oh, it would be super helpful to have, better documentation and support for, like other gem servers so that you can run
Yep.
like Gem in a Box or Gemstash or
Yep.
something. It would be
Yep.
super great to have, uh, and there's I would say loosely speaking we have kind of like three tracks in our roadmap right now, and the three tracks are big security features, which
Okay.
is things like adding support for passkeys, better 2FA,
Yep.
better password automated recoveries, like kind of like building
Yep.
out the security aspects of things, building out the security of publishing gems where like Python just shipped this new thing that they call trusted publishers that uses OIDC to basically uh, automatic publishing, but without uh, any long-lived API tokens, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
it uses OAuth so
Yep.
that GitHub can say, I am GitHub, because I signed this
Yep.
request.
Yep.
I would like to push this gem. And RubyGem says, okay, I know that you're GitHub, and I see that the owner of this gem has said GitHub should be allowed to push
Should be allowed.
gems.
Yep.
Here is a token that is only valid for 10 minutes.
Yep. And you
And
can do
so
what you can do.
if that
Yeah.
token leaks, we don't need to revoke it. It only worked
Yep.
for 10 minutes in the first place. There's
Okay.
no long-term, security issues. That token was only ever good to push that one version of that one gem for 10 minutes.
Yep. Yep.
Much
Yep.
more secure than I have pasted my read write God API
Yeah.
key across 10 gems into the GitHub
Exactly.
action, and then
Exactly.
someone figured out how to
How to
echo it into the
expose it.
logs,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep. I know
exactly.
what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, other stuff kind of like falls on the line between organizations and security, right? Maybe it's like some kind of like organization account,
Yep.
and you can give
Yep.
permissions to users
Yep.
who belong to that organization. That's like, as we have more support and contributions from members and from companies and from governments and from whoever, we absolutely want to make the lives of people who work on like AWS ships. I think it's like 125 AWS SDK gems, right? And
Okay.
so it's just like a huge
There.
hassle for them to
Yep.
manage
Yep.
all of the
Yep.
permissions on those
Yep.
gems, right?
Yep. Yep.
Similarly, if a gem starts with AWS-SDK dash, it's probably a gem from AWS.
Probably.
But also sometimes there's someone who's
Yep.
just like, I'm just going to make my own
Yep.
AWS SDK
Yep.
gem.
Yep.
And so that can be very confusing, right? It
Yeah.
would be
Of
great
course.
if you could
Blacklist.
know,
Yeah.
right, exactly. It would be great if you could know that everything starting with AWS
Yep.
something,
Yep.
it has to come from AWS, and it can't be some random person
Yep.
trying to trick you with the name of the gem.
I would like that feature, to be honest, with what I'm
Yes.
working on.
Absolutely. Totally understandable. And then there's kind of like the ideas that sound like they might be helpful, but it's not clear how many people want them or would use them, like maybe private gem hosting or
Yep.
maybe paid gem hosting. And like there are definitely it is more than zero, but it's not super clear. Like, is this like a 10 user situation? Is this
Yep.
like a 100,000 user situation? I'm not
Worth
actually
it?
sure.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
And so that's on our list, not not saying that we're like for sure going to build it, but it's definitely on our list to understand better if it would be helpful and how many people it would be helpful to,
Yep.
because like if that is something that would hugely help the whole Ruby community,
We
we
want to
do
have
want
it.
to get to it.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Definitely.
the third track, that the big kind of like concept that we has many tasks under it in our roadmap is making individual developers' lives better, right? Like if you're just like a normal person using Ruby gems, maybe you want to know what changed between two versions of a gem,
Yep.
and maybe that gem isn't on GitHub, or maybe that gem has some generated compiled artifact in it that isn't
Yep.
in the GitHub repo.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
you
Yep.
can't
Yep.
just
Yep.
say, GitHub,
Yep.
show me the diff, right?
The diff. Yep.
But there's a diff, and there is a diff between those two gems, right?
And you have
And
it.
so we have, right, and we have it, right.
Yep.
And so we have a bunch of plans to improve kind of like the visibility and understanding that you can get about a gem. And so that includes like what's inside the gem, diffs
What
between
changed?
versions of the gem,
Yep.
more, like this is this would be great. Like some kind of like code search inside the gem, right? Would
Yep.
be
Yep. Yep. Yep.
amazing,
Yep.
especially important for those cases where what's inside the gem is different from what's in the GitHub repo.
Yep.
Um, and just like more informative gem pages, right? Like
Yep.
GitHub has a bunch of information about gems. The Ruby toolbox has a bunch of information about gems. We have a bunch of information about gems that we just don't surface, right? Or that we
Yep.
don't capture in a way that's easy to surface.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so our roadmap there includes things like better visibility into popularity. Like, is this new version getting, are people upgrading to it quickly? Are people never upgrading? Is it
Yep.
this
Yep.
older
Yep.
version that everyone is sticking with? Kind of like over time, what's happening to this gem? How is it changing? Is it getting more popular? Is it getting less
Exactly.
popular?
Yep.
Um,
More
things
analytics.
like
Yeah.
exactly, and the whole, the stuff that for the gems that the Ruby toolbox cares about, it
Yep.
has really good analytics, right? It's like
Yep. Yep.
issues
The
are closed this
downloads.
fast.
Yep.
Here's how many downloads over time. Like
They
what
give you
we
a
would
grade.
love to do.
Yeah.
Exactly. So working, kind of like in that direction of just like making Ruby gems itself more useful and helpful to everyone who uses gems.
Yep.
And so those kind of like three groups, kind of like security oriented stuff, organization oriented stuff, and just kind of like useful, like tools and information for individual developers is kind of like the big things that we're thinking about and trying to do more work on as we in parallel work to increase the amount of work that we can do, right? Because
Yep.
there's always maintenance that needs to be done.
Of
And
course.
so like, it varies over time, but like my kind of like mental model is that there's somewhere between half of a developer and one developer worth of just kind of like constant maintenance, right? Like
Gotcha.
if we do less work than that, it will rot over time, right? Like things won't
Yep.
get upgraded or things
It
will
will
stop
degrade.
working.
Yeah.
Exactly, it will degrade. And so as we start to push past kind of like one person worth of work, one full-time equivalent, right? That's
You
when we're
get to
starting to be
build.
like, oh, we have some spare time, like maybe
Yep,
we can
yep, yep,
improve things. That would be super great.
yep,
And so that's kind of like where we're focused right now is we really want to try and get over that kind of like hump to like having capacity where we
yep.
can work on stuff, regularly, consistently on a long term in a long term kind of way, right? Rather than like, oh, we got this, we have bonus funding, it only lasts four
Let's
months,
let's
or
just.
right, exactly, like go as fast as you can. Yeah, exactly.
I know the feeling.
So
Yeah,
so that's our I think that's our kind of like from my perspective, that's kind of like what's in my brain for like the rest of this year is like figuring out what what we can fit from this like these three groups into the capacity that we can come up with,
yep,
and then keep working on increasing that capacity. Like it would be such a huge improvement to have,
yep.
if we had two full-time people, then both of those people could work on improvements and maintenance at the same
Maintenance. Yep,
time, and that would
yep,
be
yep, yep,
that would
yep.
be amazing, right? It would be wonderful.
That would be mission
um,
accomplished at some point.
Yeah, at some point it absolutely would. Yeah.
Yeah,
And we're working towards all of these things, like, all of the sort of like supplies and services that we've generously been getting support from is how we've been able to do this at all,
yep,
even with
yep,
less than one full, developer. Um, and yeah, and that's kind of like our plan, and our goal is to like keep working towards that and keep shipping these improvements. I guess I can shout out to a couple of cool things that we've been able to do with this recent extra support. Um, so I think the kind of like on the security side of things, we are like this close to finishing the PR that will make Bundler validate checksums for every gem. And so
okay.
it's not just that the lock file says you should get these versions, it's that the lock file says the .gem you download needs to have
It should be
exactly this
this. Yep,
checksum. And
yep,
if the
yep, yep,
checksum
yep, yep.
changes, you got to investigate because something weird is
Yeah,
happening.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and I guess like we haven't yet, fingers crossed, I think this is true. We haven't yet ever had a gem replaced by a malicious gem, but this
Okay.
is the perfect feature to handle that, right? Like
Yep,
if
yep,
someone
yep.
did sneak in and they did replace Rails with a virus, this is the
It's
the check that would
yeah,
be like, you're getting something different than you had before. What's going on?
yep.
Um,
And you as a
and
team can just write this off. This is not an issue anymore for us. We don't have to think about it. All good. We're
Right,
good.
exactly. Everyone can be confident that they're getting the thing that we sent them, the thing that they
Yep,
had before, et cetera, et cetera.
yep.
And I guess it will let me sleep a little better at night because I have every once in a while. I think I've only ever seen this happen two times, but I have once, it was like maybe it was like solar radiation or network, some really weird network thing, but two times ever I have seen RubyGems or Bundler download and install a gem, and it is a different gem than the name of the file.
What?
Like some
What?
some some wire got crossed in some network somewhere, and
Okay.
like it was like
I
the
was
the dot
expecting.
gem was named active record, and what was inside the tarball was the JSON gem, and I was like,
What the
how
hell?
did this happen?
I can
Right? It was
imagine.
just
I
so
can.
confusing. Uh, and so this also solves that kind of problem where it's like a
Yeah,
1 in 100
yep, yep,
billion
yep,
weird network error, and Bundler
yep,
will now catch that as well. Uh, yeah, and then kind of like on the organization security type side of things, we are also like really close to having support for this OIDC automated, short-term
yep,
tokens
yep.
publishing via GitHub. I think soon we'll actually be looking for alpha testers for that, I guess. So if you or someone
Yeah,
listening to this, yeah,
definitely.
like if you want to alpha test it, or if someone listening to this podcast later is interested in alpha testing, kind of like the GitHub Actions based, as safe as 2FA pushes,
Yep.
but automated through GitHub, so you don't have to enter a token.
Yep.
That's a thing that we're going to be looking for testers soon. So I would definitely encourage you to, you can
To give you a shout out.
write.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably the best place to check out if you're interested in that is the Bundler RubyGems Slack. We'll probably
Okay.
use that to coordinate the testing there.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and then, like in the long run, we're working on, designs and ways that it'll work to show the contents of gems and let you diff them and see more information about them. And so we're really excited about this upcoming work.
Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. Maybe I will get to hang out around the GitHub, the RubyGems GitHub more, because yeah, that's something exciting, something that I
Yeah,
would work on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
awesome.
And
Very
we
cool.
should join the Slack channel also.
Andre, is there anything else you? Yeah. Yep. Definitely. Is
Yeah,
there anything
absolutely.
else you'd like to give a shout out to? This has been an amazing episode. Thank you so much. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
cool
absolutely.
information.
I'm honestly, I'm just really excited to, be kind of like, we have this new nonprofit that's trying to, actively increase how it supports the community, and that I feel like that's like, we're having this kind of like moment of new excitement, new conferences, new interest. I'm just really excited about all of it, and looking forward to seeing what we can build as a result.
Definitely. Yeah, it is a Ruby renaissance a little bit out there.
Yeah,
So yeah,
it's great.
cool. Andre, thank you so much. It really was a pleasure. I definitely learned a
Absolutely.
lot tonight, and yeah, hopefully
Oh,
we'll get to chat
guys!
some more. And
Before
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
break, there's
yeah,
just like one
Yeah.
more important topic that is coming up really soon that we didn't touch on. So there is the conference coming up, the uh, RailsConf, and can you give us a small glimpse of what to expect?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the conference that's coming up towards the end of this year, it is RubyConf. It's
RubyConf.
going to be RubyConf will be run by RubyCentral as usual, but we're mixing things up a little bit. It'll be in San Diego this year, Southern California. It'll be really nice weather, and the program is also reflecting this kind of like new focus on community support that we've been talking about. And so it'll be 3 days. But the first day will be entirely community driven rather than conference talks, and it will be open source maintainers. It'll be people who like, work on projects, interact with the community, and we're all just going to get together, and it'll be a chance to get started contributing to open source. It'll be a chance to talk to the maintainers and, like tell us the things that you've always wished about how Bundler and Ruby Gems work, or tell us about the problems that you've run into. It'll be a chance. Yeah, like we're just gonna like have it be a community focused day with a bunch of community members around, and for discussion, for interest based group talks, and for lots of open source coding and contribution and discussion. And then the later part of the conference will be kind of like the more typical conference talks with some
Talks
tracks.
and yeah.
RubyConf is normally like the lower number of tracks conference, and it's usually the more kind of like open source community focused conference. And so I feel like this is a natural kind of like expansion of that. And so I'm really excited to see how it turns out. And yeah, if you or if the people listening to this are interested, uh, rubyconf.org is the place to go to sign up, and maybe I will get to see you who are listening to this there.
Yep. That sounds
Yeah,
great.
awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much, Andre. Let's keep in touch and
Absolutely.
see you around.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.